My name is Elena Rodriguez, and the night my world crumbled, I was wearing scrubs stained with coffee and the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift. I had no idea that in less than 48 hours, I would be sitting in a boardroom, where the man who destroyed my life would learn that I owned everything he thought belonged to him. But let me start from the beginning. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about dignity, about seeing someone's worth when the world refuses to, and about how sometimes the people we serve become the ones who save us. I had been working at Sunset Manor Nursing Home for 3 years when Benjamin Walker arrived. At 82, he was different from our usual residents. Most came to us broken, forgotten by families too busy for bedside visits. But Benjamin arrived in a private ambulance, accompanied by lawyers, accountants, and a son who looked at our facility like he was inspecting a budget hotel he'd been forced to book. "This is temporary," Brendan Walker announced to anyone within earshot that first day. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Until we find somewhere more appropriate." I was changing Benjamin's IV. When Brendan made that comment, I watched the old man's face tighten, a flash of something hurt, maybe anger, crossing his features before he smoothed them back into neutrality. It was the first sign that the relationship between father and son was more complicated than Brendan's public displays of filial duty suggested. Benjamin Walker had built an empire from nothing. Walker Industries started as a small construction company in the 1960s, and grew into a multi-million-dollar corporation spanning real estate, manufacturing, and technology. The business magazines called him a visionary. His employees called him demanding but fair. His son called him dad when photographers were around, and the old man when they weren't. I learned all this not from Benjamin himself, but from the way other staff members whispered about our famous resident. Benjamin rarely spoke about his achievements. Instead, he asked about mine. "You're in school?" he observed one evening as I adjusted his pillows. It wasn't a question. He had noticed the textbooks I sometimes brought to work, studying during my breaks for my nurse practitioner degree. "Part-time," I admitted, suddenly self-conscious. "It's taking longer than I hoped." "Good things usually do," he said. His eyes, despite his age, were sharp and alert. "What's your focus?" "Geriatric care." I smoothed his blanket, avoiding his gaze. "I know it's not glamorous, but you see dignity where others see decline," he interrupted. "That's rare, Elena. Don't let anyone convince you it's not valuable." It was the first of many conversations that would change my life. Over the following months, I found myself looking forward to Benjamin's room on my rounds. He never complained, despite the obvious pain from his deteriorating condition. He never demanded special treatment, though his wealth could have bought him anything. Instead, he listened. He listened when I told him about my mother, who cleaned office buildings at night to help pay for my education. He listened when I shared my frustrations about being overlooked for promotions, despite my experience and dedication. He listened when I confessed my fears about whether I was smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough to achieve my dreams. "Elena," he said one evening after I'd had a particularly difficult conversation with my supervisor about denied time off for an important exam, "do you know what I look for when I hire people?" I shook my head. "I look for people who show up," he said. "Not just physically, but completely. Who see the work that needs doing and do it without being asked. Who treat people with respect regardless of their title or their bank account. You show up, Elena. Every single day." The validation meant more to me than he could have known. In a workplace where I often felt invisible, where my suggestions were dismissed and my dedication taken for granted, Benjamin saw me. Really saw me. Brendan visited every Sunday, arriving at exactly 2 p.m. and leaving at exactly 3 p.m. These visits followed a predictable pattern. He would spend 10 minutes talking to his father, 40 minutes on his phone conducting business, and 10 minutes speaking with the nursing staff about his father's condition and care costs. "Is all this really necessary?" he asked Dr. Martinez one afternoon, gesturing vaguely at Benjamin's medications. "I mean, at his age, isn't this just prolonging the inevitable?" Dr. Martinez, to his credit, maintained his professional composure. "Your father's quality of life is still quite good, Mr. Walker. With proper care, he could have months, possibly years ahead of him." Brendan's expression soared. "Years, I was charting medications nearby, but I might as well have been invisible." Brendan talked about his father, like he was discussing the maintenance costs of an old car, wondering if repairs were worth the investment. The monthly bills here are becoming substantial, Brendan continued. And frankly, I'm not sure Dad is getting the level of care we're paying for. Some of the staff seemed inexperienced. His eyes flicked toward me dismissively. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my expression neutral. I had learned long ago that reacting to slights only gave them more power. Elena is one of our most dedicated nurses, Dr. Martinez said firmly. Your father specifically requests her for his evening care. I'm sure she's adequate, Brendan replied with a wave of his hand. But I'm considering moving Dad to a facility that specializes in end-of-life care. Somewhere more realistic about his prognosis. The conversation continued. But I stopped listening. I had heard enough conversations like this to know how they ended. Families made decisions based on convenience and cost, not on what was best for the patient. I had seen too many residents transferred to lesser facilities, where they withered and died within weeks, not from their conditions but from despair. That evening, I found Benjamin staring out his window at the garden below. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, painting the courtyard in soft pastels. Your son was here today, I said gently as I checked his vitals. I know. His voice was quiet, resigned. He thinks I'm costing him too much. The simple honesty of it broke my heart. Here was a man who had built an empire, who had provided his son with every advantage in life, reduced to worrying that his continued existence was a financial burden. You're not a cost, Mr. Walker, I said firmly. You're a person who deserves care and dignity and time. He turned from the window to look at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. Elena, I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. I sat down in the chair beside his bed, giving him my full attention. I've been watching you for months, he said. The way you treat every resident here with respect, regardless of their condition or their family's attitude. The way you study during your breaks because you're determined to better yourself. The way you stand up for what's right even when it costs you. I started to protest, to deflect the compliment, but he held up a weak hand. Let me finish. I've built a company on the principle that character matters more than credentials, that dedication matters more than pedigree. You have both character and dedication, Elena. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I arrived for my evening shift to find the nursing station in chaos. Brendan Walker stood in the center of it all, his voice raised, his face flushed with anger. Our director, Mrs. Henderson, looked flustered and defensive. This is completely unacceptable, Brendan was saying. My father's wedding ring is missing, along with his watch and wallet. These items have significant sentimental and monetary value. My stomach dropped. Benjamin's wedding ring never left his finger. His watch and wallet were kept in the locked drawer of his nightstand, standard procedure for valuables. I had checked that drawer during my previous shift, as I did every night. Everything had been secure. Sir, I assure you we're investigating, Mrs. Henderson said. We've spoken with all staff members who had access. Have you? Brendan's eyes found mine across the room. Because I find it very interesting that these items disappeared on a shift, when certain staff members were working alone with my father. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Around the room my colleagues' eyes turned toward me. Some looked sympathetic, others uncertain. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I would never take anything from a resident, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Walker's belongings were secure when I last checked. Of course you'd say that, Brendan replied coldly. But the fact remains that items worth over $50,000 have vanished, and the only people with access were the evening staff. Specifically, the staff member who spends an unusual amount of time in my father's room. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Elena, I need to ask you to empty your bag and submit to a search. It's standard procedure in these situations. The humiliation burned, but I complied. I emptied my purse, turned out my pockets, even allowed them to search my car in the parking lot. Of course they found nothing, but the damage was done. Suspicion once planted, grows quickly in fertile ground. This doesn't prove anything, Brendan said after the search came up empty. She could have passed the items to an accomplice, hidden them elsewhere, sold them already. Sir, we have no evidence, Mrs. Henderson began. You have a missing person's valuables, and a staff member with unusual access to the victim. Brendan interrupted. That's enough evidence for me. I want her fired, and I want you to file a police report. Mr. Walker, let's not be hasty, Mrs. Henderson said, but I could see in her eyes that she was calculating the risk. Brendan Walker was the son of a wealthy, high-profile resident. His accusations, whether proven or not, could damage the facility's reputation. I was one nurse among many, easily replaceable. If you don't take action, Brendan continued, I'll be forced to assume this facility cannot be trusted with my father's care or safety. I'll be transferring him immediately and sharing my concerns with the state licensing board. It was a threat disguised as concern, and we all knew it. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with something that might have been apology in her eyes. Elena, I'm sorry, but given the circumstances, I have no choice but to place you on unpaid suspension pending investigation. Please clear out your locker and surrender your badge. The words felt unreal, like dialogue from someone else's nightmare. I had worked at Sunset Manor for 3 years. I had never so much as taken an extra pen home. I had sacrificed social events, study time, sleep, to provide the best possible care for our residents. And now I was being marched out like a criminal, because a spoiled rich man needed someone to blame for his own guilt. As I cleaned out my locker, my hands shaking with humiliation and rage, I thought about Benjamin. He had been sleeping when the commotion started. Did he know what his son had accused me of? Did he believe it? The suspension became termination within a week. Mrs. Henderson called to inform me that while the police investigation had found no evidence of theft, the facility could not afford to keep an employee who had been associated with such serious allegations. She wished me luck in my future endeavors and reminded me that our separation agreement included a non-disclosure clause. I was unemployed, publicly accused of theft, and blacklisted from every nursing facility in the area. Brendan Walker had made sure the story spread through professional networks. I was the nurse who had stolen from an elderly patient. The details didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. The narrative was set. My apartment rent was due in 2 weeks. My student loans didn't pause for unemployment. My mother offered to help, but she was already working double shifts to support herself. I applied for dozens of jobs. But the background check questions were always the same. Have you ever been accused of theft or misconduct in a healthcare setting? I had to answer honestly. And honest answers ended conversations quickly. 3 weeks after my termination, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a stack of rejection letters, when my phone rang. The number was unknown, but I answered it anyway. I had nothing left to lose. Elena, this is James Morrison, Mr. Benjamin Walker's attorney. We need to meet. My heart stopped. Is Mr. Walker okay? Mr. Walker passed away 2 days ago, Mr. Morrison said gently. I'm calling because you're named in his will. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? Benjamin was dead. The man who had seen my worth when no one else did, who had encouraged my dreams when they felt impossible, who had treated me with dignity and respect, was gone. And I had never had the chance to say goodbye. The grief hit me harder than I expected. I had lost patients before, it was an inevitable part of working in geriatric care. But Benjamin had been more than a patient. He had been a mentor, a friend, a father figure I hadn't realized I needed. I wore my only good dress to the meeting with Mr. Morrison. His office was in a gleaming downtown skyscraper, the kind of place where I usually felt out of place, but the receptionist greeted me warmly, and Mr. Morrison himself came out to escort me to his office. Elena, I'm so sorry for your loss, he said as he closed the door behind us. Benjamin spoke of you often. You clearly meant a great deal to him. I wiped away a tear. He meant a great deal to me too. I still can't believe he's gone. The funeral was yesterday, Mr. Morrison said gently. It was a small service. Benjamin specifically requested that. Of course. I hadn't even known he was ill. After my termination I had lost all contact with Sunset Manor. I had missed my chance to say goodbye. To thank him for everything he had given me. You said I was named in his will, I asked, trying to focus on the reason for our meeting. Morrison nodded and opened a thick folder on his desk. Benjamin updated his will 6 weeks ago. He left you something he wanted you to have. I expected perhaps a small bequest, maybe enough to help with my immediate financial crisis. Benjamin had been kind to me, but I was realistic about my place in his life. I was a nurse who had cared for him, not family. Elena, Mr. Morrison said, his tone becoming serious. Benjamin has left you 60% ownership of Walker Industries. The words didn't make sense. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the clarification, the explanation of what he really meant. I'm sorry, what? 60% of Walker Industries, he repeated. The company is valued at approximately $50 million, making your share worth roughly $30 million. You are now the majority shareholder and, according to the corporate bylaws, the new chief executive officer. I laughed. Actually laughed. It was the only response my brain could produce to something so absurd. There has to be a mistake, I said. I'm nobody. I'm a nurse who got fired for allegedly stealing from him. Why would he? Because he saw in you what he had hoped to see in his son, Mr. Morrison interrupted. Benjamin was disappointed in Brendan for years. He felt that his son viewed the company as his birthright, rather than his responsibility. He wanted to leave Walker Industries to someone who shared his values: integrity, compassion, and dedication to doing good work. I sat in stunned silence as Mr. Morrison continued. Benjamin left detailed instructions about his reasoning. He wrote that you demonstrated every day the qualities he had tried to instill in his son. He said you showed up not just physically, but emotionally and morally. He believed you would honor the company's legacy better than someone who inherited it simply by accident of birth. But Brendan is his son, I protested weakly. This will destroy him. Brendan inherited 25% of the company, Mr. Morrison said, along with the family home, several properties, and a trust fund worth approximately $8 million. He'll be quite comfortable. The remaining 15% goes to various charities. I tried to process this information, but it felt like trying to hold water in my hands. Mr. Morrison, I don't know anything about running a company. I'm a nurse. You're a leader, he corrected. Benjamin saw that in you. And the company has an excellent management team in place. They'll help you learn what you need to know. He slid several documents across the desk toward me. There are some conditions to the inheritance. You must maintain the company's charitable giving commitments. You must keep the current employees for at least 2 years, unless they commit gross misconduct. And you must attend the next board meeting, which is scheduled for Friday. I looked down at the papers, my name printed in official legal text next to numbers that seemed impossible. $30 million, CEO of a major corporation, me. There's one more thing, Mr. Morrison said quietly. Benjamin left you a letter. He wanted you to have it before you made any decisions. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Benjamin's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear Elena, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably feeling overwhelmed. That's understandable. What I'm asking of you is enormous, and I know it seems impossible. But I want you to remember what I told you about showing up. You showed up for me when I was forgotten by my own son. You showed up for residents who had no one else to advocate for them. You showed up for your education despite working full time and facing countless obstacles. You showed up for your mother, your colleagues, your patients, even when it cost you. I'm not leaving you Walker Industries because you're perfect. I'm leaving it to you because you're good, because you see people as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. Because you understand that wealth and power are responsibilities, not just privileges. Brendan will be angry. He will try to contest this will, to diminish you, to make you feel like you don't deserve what I'm giving you. Don't let him. You earned this through 3 years of showing me what character looks like in action. The company needs someone who remembers that success without integrity is just elaborate failure. I believe you are that person. Be brave, Elena. The world needs more people willing to show up. With gratitude and respect. Benjamin Walker. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Mr. Morrison waited patiently as I tried to collect my thoughts. What happens if I refuse the inheritance? I asked. Then Brendan inherits the majority share, he replied. The company becomes his. I thought about Benjamin's disappointment in his son, about the way Brendan had treated me and the other staff at Sunset Manor. I thought about his willingness to destroy my career over missing jewelry. I thought about his impatience with his father's continued existence. The board meeting on Friday, I said finally. Will Brendan be there? Mr. Morrison smiled grimly. Oh yes. He requested an emergency meeting to discuss his father's estate and his assumption of control over the company. He has no idea about the contents of the will. We haven't disclosed it yet per Benjamin's instructions. So he's expecting to walk in as the new owner. Exactly. I looked down at the documents again, at my name next to titles I never could have imagined: CEO, majority shareholder, director. Then I looked back at Mr. Morrison. I accept. The Walker Industries headquarters occupied 30 floors of a glass tower in the heart of the business district. As I stood on the sidewalk looking up at it Friday morning, I felt the same vertigo I had experienced in Mr. Morrison's office. This couldn't be real. I couldn't actually own most of the building stretching above me. But the legal documents in my briefcase said otherwise. Mr. Morrison had spent the week preparing me for this moment. We had reviewed company financials, discussed key personnel, and practiced what I would say to the board. He had also arranged for me to meet with Benjamin's assistant, Margaret, who had worked for the company for 15 years. Mr. Walker talked about you often. Margaret had told me during our Wednesday meeting, especially in the last few months. He said you reminded him why he built this company in the first place. Why did he build it? I had asked. To prove that you could be successful without sacrificing your humanity. She replied. He wanted to create jobs, build communities, and make life better for people. Not just to accumulate wealth. And now, standing outside the building, I tried to channel Benjamin's vision. I was wearing a navy blue suit, my first business suit. Purchased 2 days earlier with money from the emergency fund Mr. Morrison had advanced me. My hair was pulled back in a professional style. And I carried a briefcase that still felt foreign in my hands. I looked like a businesswoman. Whether I was one remained to be seen. The security guard in the lobby checked my name against a list, and directed me to the executive elevator. As I rode up to the 30th floor, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me appeared calm, confident, professional. She bore little resemblance to the nurse who had been escorted out of Sunset Manor 6 weeks earlier. The boardroom was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. A massive mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Oil paintings of company founders and industry titans lined the walls. I was the first to arrive, which Mr. Morrison had suggested. Take your seat at the head of the table, he had advised. Establish your presence before anyone can question it. Margaret knocked on the door at exactly 9:55. Rodriguez? The board members are here. Shall I show them in? I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Please. They entered in order of seniority, as Mr. Morrison had explained they would. 5 men and 2 women, all impeccably dressed. All carrying the confident bearing of people accustomed to wielding power. They nodded politely as they took their seats, clearly curious about who I was but too well bred to ask directly. Brendan entered last, and his entrance was deliberately dramatic. He swept into the room wearing a black suit, his expression appropriately somber for someone who had recently lost his father. He carried himself like a man assuming his rightful place at the head of the family business. Thank you all for coming, he began, moving toward the chair at the head of the table where I sat. I know this is a difficult time, but we need to discuss the transition. He stopped short when he saw me. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then anger. What is she doing here? He demanded, pointing at me like I was an uninvited guest at his party. Ms. Rodriguez is here as a stakeholder in the company, Mr. Morrison replied smoothly, rising from his seat along the wall where he had been sitting quietly. Stakeholder. Brendan's voice rose. She's a nurse who was fired for stealing from my father. What possible stake could she have in Walker Industries? The board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure what to make of this confrontation. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on the table, letting the silence stretch. Perhaps, said Helen Cartwright, the most senior board member, we should review the agenda and understand why Ms. Rodriguez has been invited to this meeting. I'll tell you why she's here. Brendan snapped. She's probably trying to shake down the estate with some fraudulent claim. My father was elderly and vulnerable. Who knows what kind of manipulation? That's enough, I said quietly. The room fell silent. It was the first time I had spoken, and something in my tone commanded attention. Mr. Walker, I continued, looking directly at Brendan, I'm here because your father left me something in his will. Mr. Morrison, would you please read the relevant portion? And Mr. Morrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a document. The last will and testament of Benjamin Walker, dated 6 weeks before his death, states to Elena Rodriguez, who showed me every day what it means to lead with compassion and integrity, I leave 60% of Walker Industries, including all voting rights and executive privileges associated with majority ownership. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Brendan's face cycle through disbelief, rage and calculation. That's impossible, he said finally. My father would never, he couldn't have. This has to be a fraud. The will has been verified by 3 independent legal firms. Mr. Morrison replied calmly. Ms. Rodriguez is now the majority owner and CEO of Walker Industries. CEO, Helen Cartwright leaned forward. Ms. Rodriguez, what is your background in business management? It was the question I had been preparing for all week. I stood up, my legs steadier than I had expected them to be. My background is in healthcare, I said. I spent 3 years caring for your former chairman, and in that time, he taught me about leadership, integrity, and the responsibility that comes with power. I walked to the window, buying myself a moment to gather my thoughts. The city sprawled below us, full of people going about their lives, trusting that the decisions made in rooms like this would be made with their best interests in mind. Mr. Walker Benjamin believed that this company should be led by someone who understands service. I continued. Someone who shows up not because they have to, but because they believe in doing the right thing. I turned back to face the room. I may not have an MBA, but I know how to listen. I know how to treat people with dignity. And I know how to honor the vision of someone who trusted me with his life's work. This is insane, Brendan exploded. You can't seriously be considering letting some random nurse run a $50 million company. She doesn't know anything about business, about our industry, about treating people with respect. I interrupted. Because that's what your father built this company on. Not just profit margins and quarterly reports, but the belief that business should serve humanity, not the other way around. I moved back to the head of the table, placing my hands on the back of my chair. Your father watched you for 45 years, Brendan. He saw how you treated the staff at Sunset Manor. He saw how you viewed his continued existence as a financial burden. He saw how quickly you were willing to destroy an innocent person's career to protect yourself from inconvenient questions. Brendan's face flushed red. You stole from him. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what you wanted them to know, I said calmly. But your father knew the truth. He knew that his jewelry wasn't stolen. He knew that you planted that story to get rid of the one person who might tell him uncomfortable truths about how you really felt about him. The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming. Brendan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You see, I continued, your father recorded our conversations, all of them. Including the one where I told him how you talked about him to the medical staff. How you discussed his care costs like line items in a budget. How you couldn't wait for him to die, so you could move on with your life. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a small digital recorder. He also recorded your visits, including the one where you took his jewelry from his nightstand drawer while he was sleeping, planning to blame the staff for its disappearance. I pressed play. Brendan's voice filled the room, captured clearly on the device. Don't worry, Dad. You won't have to deal with that nosy nurse much longer. I'm taking care of the problem. Then the sound of a drawer opening, objects being moved. Brendan cursing softly as he tried to work Benjamin's wedding ring off his unconscious father's finger. The recording stopped. The boardroom remained silent. Your father wasn't asleep that day, I said softly. He was awake, he heard everything, he felt you stealing from him, and he decided that Walker Industries needed a different kind of leadership. Helen Cartwright cleared her throat. Mr. Walker Brendan, do you have a response to these allegations? Brendan looked around the room at faces that had once shown him deference, and now regarded him with disgust and suspicion. His carefully constructed image as the grieving son and rightful heir had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. This is entrapment, he stammered. You can't use illegally recorded conversations. In the state nursing facility where these conversations took place, all interactions with residents can be recorded for safety and legal purposes, Mr. Morrison interjected. The recordings are completely admissible. Besides, I added, looking directly at Brendan, your father left me more than just a company. He left me proof that I was right about you all along. I opened my briefcase again and withdrew a thick folder. Bank records showing that you've been embezzling from the company for 2 years. Medical records showing that you increased your father's pain medication without doctor approval, hoping to hasten his death. And sworn statements from 3 Sunset Manor employees who witnessed your theft but were too afraid of your lawyers to speak up. Each revelation hit Brendan like a physical blow. His face went from red to pale to gray. Around the table, board members began whispering among themselves. Your father spent his final weeks building a case against you, I continued, not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted to protect the company and its employees from someone who saw them as disposable assets. I closed the folder and looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a lot to process. I know you have concerns about my qualifications. But I want you to know that I'm not here to destroy what Benjamin built. I'm here to honor it. I moved to stand behind my chair, my hands resting on its back. Walker Industries will continue its charitable giving. We will maintain our commitment to fair wages and worker safety. We will grow the business, but not at the expense of our values. And if you try to contest this, I said, looking directly at Brendan, all of this evidence will become public record. Your theft, your embezzlement, your attempt to murder your father through medical neglect, it will all come out in court. Brendan finally found his voice. You can't prove murder. At worst, it's poor judgment in medication management. You're right. I admitted. But the headlines won't make that distinction. Paisoningi daan fade r. Anar si ahama teftiskendel, hiamiambus elbeaziels melabea efe r. Des, how do you think that will affect your reputation? Your ability to find employment? Your wife's social standing? For the first time since he entered the room, Brendan looked genuinely frightened. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he could see the social and professional destruction that awaited him. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to accept your 25% inheritance and disappear, I replied. Sell your shares to me if you want immediate cash. Start over somewhere else. Find a way to become the man your father hoped you could be. And if I don't, then I release everything. The recordings, the financial records, the medical evidence. I let the police and the press and the public decide what kind of person you really are. Brendan looked around the room one more time, searching for allies, for support, for someone who might help him salvage this disaster. He found nothing but cold professional faces waiting for him to make a decision. I need time to consider. No. I interrupted. You need to decide now. Accept the will as written, take your inheritance, and leave. Or fight me and lose everything. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Brendan's shoulders sagged in defeat. I accept the terms of the will, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Excellent. I sat down in my chair, the CEO's chair, and looked around the table. Now, let's discuss the future of Walker Industries. The next 3 hours were a blur of financial reports, strategic planning, and introductions to key personnel. The board members, once they accepted the reality of the situation, proved to be intelligent and experienced advisors. They walked me through the company's current projects, its challenges, and its opportunities. Helen Cartwright, in particular, became an invaluable ally. After the meeting, she approached me privately. Elena, she said, I knew Benjamin for 20 years. I saw him build this company from nothing. And I watched him grow increasingly disappointed in his son. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What you did in there, the way you handled Brendan, the way you took control of the room, Benjamin would have been proud. You didn't just inherit his company. You earned it. As the boardroom emptied, I found myself alone for the first time since becoming a CEO. I walked to the window and looked out at the city below, trying to process everything that had happened. 6 weeks ago, I had been a nurse struggling to pay rent. Today, I was the head of a $50 million corporation. The transformation felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. But as I stood there, I thought about Benjamin's letter, about his belief in showing up, about his conviction that wealth and power were responsibilities, not just privileges. I thought about the employees counting on Walker Industries for their livelihoods, about the communities that depended on the company's charitable giving, about the legacy that had been entrusted to me. I picked up the phone on the conference table and dialed Margaret's extension. Margaret, it's Elena. I'd like to schedule meetings with all department heads next week. I want to understand every aspect of this company. Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. And Ms. Rodriguez, welcome to Walker Industries. I hung up the phone and gathered my papers. As I prepared to leave the boardroom, I noticed Brendan's briefcase abandoned under the table. He had left in such a hurry that he had forgotten it. I considered calling security to return it to him, but then I remembered his threats, his cruelty, his willingness to destroy innocent people for his own convenience. Brendan Walker had burned every bridge between us. He could retrieve his own belongings. I walked out of Walker Industries headquarters as its CEO, carrying the weight of Benjamin's trust and the promise of a future I was only beginning to understand. 3 months later, Walker Industries announced record quarterly profits, alongside increased charitable giving, and a new healthcare initiative for employees' families. The business press called it an unprecedented turnaround. Industry leaders praised the company's innovative approach to corporate responsibility. I knew better. It wasn't a turnaround. It was a return to the values that had built the company in the first place. Brendan sold his shares to me 6 weeks after the board meeting. He moved to California, where I heard through industry contacts that he was working as a mid-level manager at a small construction firm. He had kept his promise to disappear, and I had kept mine not to destroy him completely. Sometimes I wondered if he had learned anything from his fall, if he understood why his father had chosen a nurse over his own son. But mostly, I didn't think about Brendan Walker at all. I was too busy honoring the trust that Benjamin had placed in me. I kept Benjamin's letter in my desk drawer, reading it whenever I faced a difficult decision. Show up, it reminded me. The world needs more people willing to show up. And so I did. Every single day. Did you like this story? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of betrayal and justice, please support us with a super thanks, so we can continue bringing you more incredible life stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Elena's amazing journey. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.